Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another one of the Shortlist Showcases. I'm Alison McRobbie. I'm the State Manager of the Queensland Chapter of the Australian Institute of Architects. It's a real pleasure to be here this afternoon and with you, wherever you are. So we've got a very full afternoon this afternoon. We're looking at our shortlisted multi-residential projects today, and these are the front runners for the Job and Froud Award for Residential Architecture, multi-residential. So without any further ado, I'm going to jump straight in and introduce you to Shane Plazabert of Plazabert Architects. Shane and his firm have won the Lord Mayor's Architecture Award for Brisbane Buildings That Breathe for the amazing Lucent apartment development. So Shane, congratulations, and can I hand the talking stick to you now?
Thanks very much for that. So I'm presenting Lucent Apartments this afternoon. I might start with just a summary of the building, if I could. So this is an aerial map of where Lucent is located. So we're down in Newstead, just off the edge of the valley. Our site is on the corner of Longland Street and Festival Place in Newstead. This is a site plan that we produced. So Lucent's actually part of a bigger picture master plan, which is a site area of 8,000 square metres. Lucent is stage one of that bigger picture master plan. Stage two contains a project we did, which is 25 stories residential building and then a 3-story retail building. And Lucent sits on Longland Street and on the corner of Festival Place. This is a diagram section we've produced just to give you an idea of the scale of the building. So there's 3 basement levels. There's a double height retail space. There's a residential entry off Longland Street and a retail entry off a future urban courtyard. There's a mezzanine above the retail. There's a transfer slab that occurs between the residential tower and the retail. And we have a series of typical floors. The floor that sits under the top part of the building, or the crown of the building, is our penthouses. And then we put all of our services up under the gym and rec level, and we have a rooftop pool. Well, the building contains 190 apartments, 1,100 square metres of retail and about 300 cars. That's an early diagram sketch we did to try to compose the building. That was a CAD elevation of the building with the ground plane, retail and podium, the tower and the rooftop. That's the short elevation facing, the western elevation facing the laneway of Longland Street. It's an early diagram plan we did to try to organise the planning for the client. The typical floor is 14 units per floor, open-ended corridors, double-loaded apartments. The yellow is the screening, sliding screens and fixed screens. And we introduced 4 vertical green spines through the tower. That's a CAD plan of the typical floor. So one of the key things we tried to do here, whilst we were doing a multi-res building, the building's kind of broken up into 3 or 4 components. So one of the key things we tried to do is set up a retail double height space that addressed the street. This is sort of the hero corner from Longland Street and Festival Place. And we created some public amenity as well, even though it's a private building. So there's a pocket park here that allows future tenants to spill out onto. That's a close-up of the corner of the building. So the tower sits on a transfer podium. Off the transfer podium, we hang this big concrete awning with a garden on it. This is a big concrete screen that wraps around to form a colonnade. And then we have retail at ground level. That's a section diagram there, just explaining this concrete awning we tried to achieve, which floats above the pedestrian walkway that wraps around the entire perimeter of the building. The transfer slab and the start of the tower, and we have a mezzanine above the retail. So street view, a big concrete screen, which is hung from the ring beam that wraps around the whole podium. This is the double height colonnade walkway spaces we try to achieve with our big floating awning. All of the awning that wraps the whole perimeter is a garden on top, which is starting to grow now. This is the spill out from the retail space blurring into the edge of the pocket park. The floating awning, and that sort of gives you the scale of a person under that. So we tried to do something which is column free and compress the space where people are walking around the edge of the building, but give quite a degree of shelter and shade protection to pedestrians. And that's an example. Campos Coffee has gone into one of the corners of the building. That's an outdoor double height space. So on the ground plane off Longland Street, we have a residential entry where we just break the awning and pop up a concrete entry element. This leads you into the residential lobby of the building. We have some devices here where we bring concrete seat elements from the inside out as a gesture of people sitting externally on the building. So materials are fairly neutral palette, off-form concrete, some honed granite. This is some of the detailing of the off-form concrete and the timber batten sophites. The ground plane retail, we used timber windows and doors for the joinery into the retail, and then a natural stone from Eco Outdoor for the cladding. Just some of the detailing of the concrete seat and the garden elements. So landscape played a fairly big part in the building. That's the entry door threshold into the residential lobby. So on our scheme here, we didn't really do a reception counter as such. We actually just have it more like a private lobby that you walk into. So this is sort of the seating for waiting for people. Again, just a neutral palette, some honed limestone on the floor, timber battens, double height space. On the northern side of the building, we have a retail entry. So the retail entry takes you up to a mezzanine public gym, but also gets you access into the public car park, which sits below the street level. Between the Longland Street on the south and the future urban courtyard on the north, because the building has quite a big perimeter, we actually cut a little laneway spine through, which gives you access to the public amenities. That's just some of the finer grain detailing into the retail. So tower composition, so it's a fairly large building, this with 190 apartments, 1,100 square meters of retail and a rooftop pool. So we tried to break the building into a 1/3, 2/3 proportion with a glazed tower black corner element separated from sort of the tail of the building, which are these ribbon balconies by these green spines that you've seen on the plan. So that's the tower element sitting on the podium, and you can sort of see the start of the rooftop pool and the garden. So this diagram, the yellow corners are the black vertical towers, the green are the 4 vertical spines. And this piece that wraps off here and curves around is the white ribbon balconies. So that's one of the east, I think that might be the eastern vertical garden that separates the 2 tower elements. These are just some views from street level looking up at the tower composition. One of the corners that we did off-form, steel off-form curved concrete corners. Our sliding screens that we introduced. We have fixed screens, so we tried to shade the building as much as we can. So from the retail base and then the tower element that sits on the podium, we introduced this, we call it an urban oasis, sort of backyard area, which sits at the top of the building. So this is up on level 15. We did a 55-meter pool. We tried to do as much landscaping as we could on here, and we introduced this little concrete awning which forms an eyelid that wraps around the building. So 55-meter pool with spa and a wet edge, and you can sort of see the, I think these photos were taken when we had bushfires, so it's a little bit hazy, but some distant and district views, view back towards the city. A diagram section that shows the apartment sitting under the pool with the deck and the wet edge, green garden spilling over the edge and the concrete awning acting as the eyelid. And we sat the services under the gym. Just some outdoor seating and garden on the pool level, some detail of the pool. The pool at night, so fairly dramatic in its length. This was one thing that we tried to do to get rid of all of the plant from the top of the pool, which sometimes happens in these buildings with aircon, but we wanted to make this backyard on the roof. So we actually introduced a zone of 2.1 meters under the gym, which allowed us to put all of our plant, air conditioning. So the residents have embraced this backyard rooftop recreation. Yoga happens, gym sessions. We have a private dining room that sits up there that people can hire out. This is all of the interior. This is the outdoor barbecue and teppanyaki that we provided. We also did a little rooftop cinema, which doubles as a simulated golf driving range. So the apartments, we tried to make the ceiling height as generous as we can. So in these types of developments, we have 2.7 to 3 meter ceiling heights, and we tried to maximize as much as we can the opening between indoor and outdoor. Lots of glazing to let natural light in. Some views from the apartments back towards the city. Again, a fairly neutral palette within the apartments. Typical ensuite. The screening on the building. So in our climate, we just tried to introduce horizontal sliding screens that allow people to move them and change the light that gets in. And then we have some fixed screens on other corners of the building. That's an element there of the building, screen sliding. The diagram again, the yellow is the screening devices. And another element that we were fairly happy that we got was open-ended corridors when you get out of the lift. So you get light and natural ventilation. So you're aware of what the climate is doing outside. The mezzanine level, which sits above the ground level retail, ended up being a public, very large gym, which everyone in the building can access, but also the public in Brisbane. And one last little thing we did was we introduced a service building, which is detached from the main tower. So that allows us to not have any car access, plant room, pump rooms, or refuse rooms around the bottom of the retail. So the whole retail acts as an island, and you get retail frontage everywhere. This is basement access, refuse access, substation for our building and the future stage 2. It's probably a pretty quick summary of our building. A building that we tried to respond to our climate and create some ideas of what it might mean to live in an apartment building in Brisbane in 2020. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Shane. That's yeah, beautiful. Congratulations again on your award. I'm going to hand over now to another Shane, Shane Thompson, and this time we're going south of the border to northern New South Wales, the Tweed region. Shane's going to talk about his project Serene Living Stage 2. So over to you, Shane.
Thank you. Just give me a second to bring this up on the screen. Yeah. Okay. So this is the project. It's a seven-story high project, and it is an addition to this existing building, as I talked about. It's for seniors living, and seniors living in New South Wales has some very strict requirements in terms of the internal planning. Essentially, all of the planning has to comply with the accessible design requirement, which is unlike Queensland and other places for this to qualify. It's a relatively small site at just over 600 square metres. So our most significant issue here was to develop a new building on this site, which would develop the typology already developed on the existing building and become the very best neighbour that it could, compared to an alternative developer who would have just gone out of their way to do the very best they could for this site on its own. And that's informed the design quite significantly. This is the southern edge of our new building, which faces obviously the northern edge of the existing building. And you can see there that part of our strategy has been to bend or develop a concave curve that means that the impact of the new building is minimised on the views to the existing building in this location, particularly along this northern aspect, and minimises the access to sun and light in this direction. The other key strategy was to, if you like, mould or sculpt the building in a way which breaks up its scale significantly, and we were in fact assisted by the Tweed Shire Development Control Plan in that regard, which required a number of stepping manoeuvres for the building, which have been incorporated, as you can see here, above the 4th floor, where the building steps back. So the curve, that curved facade continues around to here and then straightens out at that point. But then the curve continues around, and you'll see that in the plans, which I'll show you later. The other key element of the strategy to make this a good neighbour was to develop a green facade to the new building. And because we have a nursing home next door to us on the northern side, which is over here, we decided to implement that strategy on both of those key sides of the building. So on the north and the southern sides of the building, we have a trellis which is set about 500 millimetres out from the main external facade. And that trellis is then served by a number of planters, which are placed along that ledge, which is also a surface ledge. And you can just see here, these photos were taken about 2 months after the building was built, and you can just see the creepers starting to take off. If you were to visit the building now, you'd probably see about 50% more green than is available there. The idea of using climbers or creepers, as opposed to the more expensive approach to a green wall, also allows us to trim the creepers to suit the particular views or kind of privacy concerns for each of the individual residents in the new building. You can see there in those two buildings together in context. So they do share a similar typology, and they share some similarities in some of their tectonics and in the colours. We took the opportunity also with this project to expand the communal facilities available to all the residents of the total project. These buildings are only joined together at the ground floor, and on that ground floor we've developed a new auditorium which opens out onto this side street called Powell Street. Although there is no formal entry to this building from here, all entrances to this building come off this building on the ground floor. And you'll see how that works in plan later on. The configuration of this building includes a semi-basement car park. We have about a 1 metre flood level through there, which meant that we had to raise the ground floor. But we've installed in the basement a gym and, if you like, a workshop, and that's illuminated by a skylight, which is formed by just ramping the floor of the terrace outside this auditorium up to allow natural light and ventilation into that gym and workshop below. The lower level there not only includes a new auditorium, which can be subdivided into 3 different spaces for use of things like Pilates, yoga, dance classes, large or small dinners. There's one room that seems to be normally set up permanently for large jigsaw puzzles and other game playing. So it provides a very flexible facility as an adjunct to the library and the cinema that the facility already had. The next 3 floors consist of two bedroom apartments per floor, and the top 3 floors are a single 3-bedroom apartment per floor. And generally the height is consistent with the height controls and the height of the existing building next door. This is a close-up of that detail, and you can see there the simple idea of the projecting ledge beyond the external facade. The structure is all coloured in white, and the non-structural walls are coloured in this dark black brown. And you can see the planters that are randomly placed, or seemingly randomly placed along those ledges, with a variety of different creepers, all of which have flowering plants in them, which will flower at different times of the year. And as I said, which can be trimmed to suit the individual needs for privacy and sun control. So this is a larger part of the northern facade. On the northern facade is where we have our elevator and single fire stair. And all of our services for each floor are enclosed inside a small services room, which has an adaptation of that larger trellis screening that we have to the building. And generally you can see here with the trellises that where they're outside windows, we have changed the pitching of the trellis to minimise any impact on views, so that there is a sort of almost a seeming randomness to the way that trellis works. Again, this was just taken a couple of months after the building was finished, and you can see the vines and the creepers already starting to take off quite healthily. It's interesting here in that the vines on the north, which is this side of the building, are looking healthier and are growing faster, but the vines on the south get a lot more rain, although all are fully irrigated. This also means that all of the views outside all of the windows are direct. There's green in the immediate view, so you have green views outside of all the windows, so that you actually feel a little more like you're living in a grounded residence rather than being in a high-rise apartment. This, if you like, is the rear view of the building. So this is the adjoining property where there's an aged care facility. In the background here is the existing larger seniors living complex. And then this is the new micro tower, if you like. The key views from this site are to the east and to the west. All apartments are designed for cross ventilation, and all apartments have external planting associated with them. And all are designed to be fully accessible and adaptable depending on the residents' needs as they age in place. Another part of the green strategy here was to develop a series of green roofs, and you can see that this larger ground floor or podium, which takes up most of that ground floor space, is planted out, and this part of that podium floor is stepped down in deference to the courtyards of the apartments, which are just here to the north on the existing building, so that we can minimise the bulkiness or that sense of enclosure that comes from building the podium at the higher level. And that provides us with a service corridor. It's only 2.1 metres high to the auditorium. So that's quite serendipitous in the way that that worked out. And on the ground floor, we also have a cafe and a hydrotherapy pool. And these are the lower floors, and you can see here where the building's also further stepped back with another green roof. So in due course, this building will largely be seen as a green element from the existing building. The designs also afforded us the opportunity to set the building back a bit further from the side boundary than what might have been done by an alternative developer. One of the things that was missing in consultation with the existing residents was a small cafe area where they could gather, and this has been franchised out to an operator. And this is part of the cafe, which forms part of the connection between the existing building and the new. So in fact, you walk from about where that cursor is at the moment. This is actually a busy pathway. So this space is quite activated by people moving from the main building into the new building and past the cafe, and then beyond the cafe again is the auditorium spaces behind that wall there. And you can see that cafe there, and that cafe opens out to the north onto a hydrotherapy pool. Here's our ground floor plan. So this is our connection to the existing building sits here on this boundary. And our connection to the existing building is at this point here. And from here, we pass through the cafe to the auditorium. You can see it can be divided into 3 different spaces for different uses. And also it can take enough in a banquet setting for, say, a Melbourne Cup or a Christmas Day luncheon. The cafe here is a minimal kind of cafe, which both has internal seating and some outdoor seating to this northwestern terrace, which is shaded by a planter and some trees to the adjoining allotment here, and a new hydrotherapy pool in this corner. And that hydrotherapy pool is actually set into the basement so that it finishes flush at this floor level. Change rooms and facilities for the pool and the auditorium and cafe here, and then our elevator and fire escape stair. And the auditorium here opens out onto this terrace as a breakout space, and that terrace then ramps up to provide a skylight in this location with a planter below it for natural light to the workshop below. So this is the basement below, and that's accessed via the existing basement. You can see where we've cut in here, and this is the new car parking. This is the new workshop and gymnasium space in here, which is illuminated by that skylight and that location there. On the typical floors, this is our typical lower floor. You can see 1 2-bedroom apartment here. And as you can see, because of the relatively small size and narrowness of the site, we're able to get a good cross ventilation through all these apartments. If you look closely, you'll see that all the corridors and the spaces outside the doorways are all oversized to make the rooms, all the spaces, fully accessible. And here's our little service room that contains the condensers and access to all of the other services in the building, and a garbage chute just in this location. And so this building enjoys the views to the east over the Pacific Ocean and the Tweed River. And this side of the building enjoys some views towards Coolangatta and the Coolangatta Hill. Otherwise, there are no views in this direction other than to the rear wall of the nursing home, and views in this direction, which are limited from, fairly limited from here, and which the screen helps with privacy, looks back towards the existing building in this kind of location. Each of the 3 upper level apartments is finished completely differently, which was a decision made by the client. And under the New South Wales legislation, the apartments are not available for pre-sale and can only be sold once the building's completed. And I'll just point out, obviously, the ledges with the planter boxes on each side of the building here. So the building will have these very soft edges in time as the plants and the creepers develop. The penthouses and sub-penthouses are all 3 bedrooms and quite generous by comparison. And of course, at this 4th level here, where we step the building back, there's an extra large terrace. Briefly on some elevations and some sections. This is the northern elevation, and you can see here the contrast between the side core with the elevator and the stair and the screened balconies, which rely on the planting to ultimately provide the amount of privacy and sunscreening that's required. This is our western elevation, which has some roll-down sunscreens on the windows, which takes advantage of, and a balcony in this location, which takes advantage of the views to the west. And this is our eastern elevation, which takes advantage of the views towards the ocean and the Tweed River. And you can see here on the southern elevation how we are able to narrow the building from minimal, slightly greater than minimal setback on the south, and then to bend the building back around to open out views from the existing building towards the northeast, and similarly at the upper level of this building here. That section shows you then how the building comes together. So there are 4 different floor plates to the building. There's a basement level which plugs into the existing basement, which you can see there. You can see that we're about 1 metre above the natural ground. Our auditorium facility with some transfer structure incorporated in here. Our lower ceiling, well, it's not properly illustrated there, where we actually drop that part of that roof down there to minimise the impact on these existing private courtyards. And you can see the 3 levels of 2-bedroom apartments, followed by the 3 levels of 3-bedroom apartments, or sub-penthouses and penthouses. And at that transition point, there's another green roof. So they're all green roofs all through here. There's a minimum amount of plant up top, but it's not a green roof. This is the maximum height, so there isn't anyone looking down on these roofs from anywhere else. So it's a very modest building in some ways, and you can see from this smaller site plan here, the relationship between the tower and the podium level, which is predominantly here on the south. So we are incorporating not only 9 new apartments, but also enhanced communal facilities for the whole development. And all of that linked into as smooth a transition as possible into the existing building. I'll just take you briefly back now that you've seen those plans. So that's the view from the northeast corner, auditorium, existing building, new building. From the south again, and you can see the creepers and the climbers starting to take off through here. That northern elevation, again, you can see how the creepers and the climbers are starting to use the trellis. And that western elevation. And there you can see the green roofs with the apartments above. Thank you.
Thank you, Shane, and congratulations. Beautiful project, and wonderful to see something for, you know, the aged care cohort. So, you know, well designed and so thoughtfully presented. So I'm now going to introduce you, we're back in Brisbane now, and I'm going to introduce you to Erhard Rathmar of Refresh Design. So Erhard's going to take us through also a lovely small project, which is Trion Amos. So Erhard, over to you.
Sorry, can you hear me? Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for the opportunity to present our project today. Our presentation will include today some site specifics, strategy and approval process, some difficulties we had to overcome, and then I finish up with post-occupation evaluation and a short 35 seconds video showing some internals. All right, so we believe that Trion Amos is providing a new housing choice in a neighborhood that is predominantly dominated by 2 development typologies, one of them being the high-rise apartment and the other one the single house. As such, the project is located between traditional Queenslanders and taller, often commercial buildings, and the project tries to respond to both to local character while also negotiating the scale of surrounding buildings. It could be considered an exemplar of how urban leftover spaces of inner city land can be transformed into the so-called missing middle and could help to counter the urban sprawl. So the site is located in the heart of the 40th Valley. So here's the site, basically on the corner of Arthur and Amos Lane, in proximity to a range of amenities, including employment, healthcare, education, public transport, community services, shopping, and entertainment. You can see it's very close here to the Howard Smith Wharf. It's close here to the James Street district, Brunswick Street malls. The residents telling us that they hardly use their cars for their everyday needs. When we first got involved in 2014, the site was occupied by a former car park, and this car park was titled to a close by commercial building at Brunswick Street to offset car parking. So this strip we see here is basically all we have as a site. So back then, when the client contacted us and asked the questions, what could we do with this restricted piece of land? The site didn't look overly big potential. It's only 7.2 meters wide. It's 46 meters long. Literally only 330 square meters inside, and it provided 15 car parks, of which more than half have had to be retained. And PCC zoning allowed for a double-story single house. However, what we achieved was, by retaining most of the car parking, we could add 3 townhouse-style units, which each of them having 3 bedrooms. Even though the site was too small, we achieved some indoor-outer living in these separation spaces between the 3 units. And each of the units has 1 enclosed and 1 open car park attached to the unit, with the remaining car parks still being attached to the commercial building. The path to arrive there was paved with numerous hurdles. The council approval was initially quite promising, so we went to a pre-lodgement meeting. We presented some of these graphics, and council was very encouraging. The site was considered to be a fringe position between normal housing and commercial zoning. So council saw this as a favorable, do something particular. And we could demonstrate here that bulk and scale would be addressed so that we don't overshadow or impact the housing next door too much. However, after lodging the DA, we found out that the delegate had changed, and eventually it took, after 2 years, a DA was granted, but 2 main hurdles had to be overcome. And one of them being, even though the house in the proposal in height didn't go beyond the height of the neighboring single home, they didn't want to have a 3rd story, and they strictly made us to meet the character appearance of a single house. And we had to demonstrate that the outer areas were not focusing on the neighboring house, but they were basically oriented towards Amos Lane. So the 3rd story was a real issue. The 3rd story basically was incredibly important to keep the project viable. So what we came up with was this attic story, which you can see here, the ridge of it. This initially seemed to be a bit of a compromise to the developer first. However, as it turned out, and the developer found out later on, it became quite a feature of the project, and I will tell you a bit more about this later on. The other item that was really critical to address was the character code, and it was quite literally forced onto us. So we had to express this veranda, we had to have the posts, we had to show roof towards the street. So we then ended up doing a more modernized interpretation of this character code with randomized patterning, which then obviously is repeated throughout the building. But in the design, we tried to achieve a sort of spaciousness by following 3 principles. And one of them was trying to borrow outer spaces to make the units appear bigger than what they actually were. Maximize the indoor-outdoor flow. So these units are basically really, this one would use all that as a space. This unit would use all that as a space, and this unit would use all that area as a space. So it's quite, while the internal spaces are quite compact, with all these outer spaces, they appear much bigger than they really are. And then obviously we focused on the FWs of spaces. So typical double-loaded corridors here, laundry to one side, toilet to the other side, studies under staircases and so forth. I will show more about later on. So when there's so little space available, obviously designing very simple and compact floor plans is very essential. What we decided on is introducing a sort of a walkway at the back of the site from which the units can be accessed. So this is a very narrow 1 meter walkway with some landscape pockets, of which each unit had their own access. So each unit has its own stairway that then connects to the upper level. And these stairs arrive in these courtyard spaces. However, they are designed in a way that there's always full privacy to one unit, while the other owner gets a cross view as accessing unit and then enters his space. These 3 meter separation gaps were quite important. They not only give us outer area, they obviously are important for fire restrictions, and then give each of the units their own identity and their own expression as a separate dwelling from the outside. Every unit is just about 90 square meters of internal space per house, per unit, and each of them features 3 bedrooms plus external spaces. Staircases are placed strategically here quite central in the unit, and they give a sense of spaciousness to each of the units, which are otherwise quite compact. If you look at the elevations, the facades are structured so that you can read the 3 units. So there's obviously the 3 roofscapes. Metal cladding was used for the entire attic story. It kind of resembles the experience of the roofscape of Queensland traditional houses. And careful placement of these dormer windows and sliding doors is bringing in plentiful of light and allows for ventilation, but also has been designed to counteract the low ceiling height and allow for circulation, which we see a bit later on. A combination of rectangular claddings, roofs, and windows is interlocking and gives these rectangles which follow the slope of the land. So looking at this image, we can see again, so here we see these dormer shapes where there's always corridor spaces behind. These are these spaces between the buildings which then extend as a covered outer space under the unit. So this unit, the unit always has a covered outer space and an open outer space, and there is the stair behind where you get natural ventilation, the stair before you walk into the unit, and then car parking attached to the commercial building in this area, and then closed car park for each unit there. Attic spaces can be quite tricky. Dare to say I may have a bit of an advantage in Austrian on it, simply because we had The issue is that here at the pitching point of the roof, we only have about 1.5 meter in room height. But on the other side on the ridge, you have more than 3 meters height, which was quite pleasant. So what we did is we very carefully placed these dormer windows, and we always have placed them where you need height for particular functions. If you look at this very miniature bathrooms for bedroom 2 and 3, dormer window is here where the shower is. Here the space is high enough anyway, and where the toilet is, it can be 1.5, 1.6 meter. It doesn't feel restrained. Similar in the ensuite, the shower is about 3 meter high. The basin is next to it, and then the toilet seat is just where it's lower to not feel restricted. Similar in the walk-in robe, there's the dormer window where the corridor is. Where you walk to the bed, there's the dormer window where you have to have access to the bed. Similar on this side and similar on that side. As you may probably have read from the scale of the building before, documentation of the project was quite difficult due to limited spaces for services and structures. With a block width of only 7.2 meters and losing 1 meter width for the access path behind, it only leaves 6.2 meters width for the unit, which is right at the very limit to get a dwelling organized. We were working closely with all consultants, including structural engineers, hydraulic engineer, fire engineer, certifiers, and landscapers to balance architectural aims against code requirements. In fact, fire engineering was extremely critical. As all of you will be aware, you need 3 meter distance from the facade to the boundary to generally not screen windows, fire screen windows. We had a really good engineer, and with a few interesting maneuvers like placing gates at the bottom of the stairs, it's literally made this the entry. We could remove any fire screen or any fire cladding, which was quite important for once, obviously for architectural result, for cost, and obviously use these spaces for something where they serve a better purpose. Garages are fairly tight as well. They all have a cross fall to just work with the slope of the driveway, simply because you literally, from the threshold, from the boundary to Amos Lane, you drive straight in the driveway. There's no driveway where you could untwist the ground to not have any fall in the garage. So it's quite a lot of these little glitches that had to be resolved. Internally, we used extensively timber and combined it with more commercial finishes. We used steel frame stairs and tried to create interiors that are contemporary yet familiar at the same time. Effective but inexpensive design solutions included elements like just by using some custom flashings that joined all these door units and windows to one glazing unit, made them obviously much more sleek and much more architectural, or developing bulkheads out of plasterboard and just dropping in a very basic range hood gave an architectural feature, very cost effective in a development project. And using these lightweight stairs, which are very transparent, again helped to create a spaciousness in a sense of verticality, combined with the window on that side, gave almost a bit of a lantern element and obviously a source of light and airiness in the dwelling. Here again we see a detail where the steel stair joins the concrete floor and the timber. Privacy screens, we developed a custom pattern and tried to reference the roof angles and the vertical lines of the building into these metal screens. Oops, I'll look fast. Here again, we see the bulkhead of the range hood, very simple and clean finishes for cabinetry. The screens, giving a sense of privacy while still at the same time providing the opportunity for outlook. here we get an experience of the pitching point and low corner of the room of the attic space. Again, with the baited on this side, it's not a problem. Double use of space, the study under the staircase, still getting natural light from this nice window. A strategically placed Juliet balcony gives a quite small dining space the sense to be larger than it actually is. So finishing the project in 2019, the units sold very quickly. Actually, within 3 weeks' time, they were all gone. And shortly after this, we did some post-occupation evaluation, and feedback that was consistent through all the units was that while the units are effectively quite small, they have a sense of spaciousness. And what they particularly mentioned is they got a sense of privacy, even though there's quite many buildings around. The buyers, they seem to know each other quite well, and they came up with the term the Queenslander apartment, simply because there is this appearance that's taking some cues of the Queenslander. It is an apartment, and they all were talking about two items, and one of them is the indoor-outdoor spaces and how well they connect and how much they use them, and the fact that they are apartments, yet there's no party walls. So we kind of got confirmed that these separation spaces between units were incredibly important. And I'll quickly show you now this short video with which I finish up, which just need to get out of that. Please forgive me. It's been produced by a real estate agent, so the sound may be a bit much, but I think the images are quite good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Erhard.
Sorry.
Yeah, ingenious approach to such a tight space and a wonderful outcome. So we're just actually going to go across the river now for our last three projects. And we have another project that we're looking at, the missing middle approach to that. And that is Red Dog Architects. And we have Linton Godden there, and I did see Paul Worrell's face pop up at one stage, so I don't know if Paul's going to be in it as well, but they're going to take you through small street townhouses.
Yeah, thanks, Alison. Yeah, Paul can't help poking his head in and out, but I think he's gone already, so he won't be joining us, but I'll get started. I'll just share this. Yeah, first I'd just like to start with just a real quick acknowledgement of country, both speaking and working from day to day on Turrbal and Yagara land, and then our site for this particular project over at Bulimba on Yagara land. Just a small correction, so we're on Smallman Street, so the Smallman Street townhouses, but we're kind of the northern end of Smallman Street. And the southern end of Smallman Street, actually, pre-colonial times, was a traditional gathering space. Also, just like quick thanks to the jury and the institute, and just a congratulations to all the other entrants. Just some fantastic projects. I think it's pretty cool that we get to follow after Refresh and their great little project, because this is almost like the could say the suburban version of the townhouses in that missing middle. So this is a quick little site plan. Our site located in red here northern end of Smallman Street, and it's 30 or 40 metres walk to Oxford Street, for those that know the area of Yallimba. It's a suburb which is kind of dominated by timber and tin houses, and especially within our little precinct, res kind of precedent was the six pack, or the kind of the brick typology. So in some ways we took a few nods from both, but really looking to challenge that existing multi-residential precedent. So the project itself was for 4 units, and really the client had a strong vision to create 4 homes, as he would describe them, rather than apartments. So we worked pretty hard to try and achieve that. He was also a smaller developer. He'd done a few developments in Toowoomba and the Darling Downs, and this was his first major one in Brisbane, which was a great kind of opportunity for us as well, to just kind of assist him with this kind of area, and he kind of lent heavily on us. And I think one of the great achievements of the project was that kind of that client-architect relationship, and us being able to package architectural victories, as we'd kind of call them, or architectural details, in a way that kind of met his desire, but also met what was a modest budget on this project. So if I just jump back really quickly. So we had this kind of long site, 600 square metres, 15 metre, and it had a brilliant northern aspect. So immediately that became part of our thinking, that we would orientate each unit or each townhouse to get that northern aspect, while still being able to address the street, especially from the front unit. And then acknowledging the timber and tin history or precedent of the suburb. So bringing in elements like the pitched roof or the gabled roof, a lot of the materiality lends itself from that timber and tin precedent, and creating this kind of this beautiful shared undercroft, which hopefully I'll show you a few photos of a bit later. And then once again, small little kind of townhouses, how we maximise them and make them feel as big as we can, and borrowing views across kind of connected backyards, borrowing landscape, borrowing views, but also managing privacy both from and to our development. So the ground floor plan is pretty simple. We end up with a southern driveway, which becomes this really great shared undercroft space. And then 4 units stacked east to west, all with a northern aspect. Ground floor is car storage and entry. We did work hard to give each unit as much articulation for a front door as possible. And there's a bit of line marking, which we'll see in the photos, which just helps to distinguish each pedestrian entry. As we move up to the first level, it's all living. Something we tried really hard on this is the spaces where we could, we worked them as hard as possible and made them as compact as we could. Things like a small little powder room, which we've snuck in here behind the cupboard, walk-in pantry. And that really allowed us to articulate beautiful open plan living spaces. We've got cross ventilation. The unit to the west has street activation. The unit to the east has its own stair back down to its kind of larger courtyard on the ground level. And nice, generous, articulated balconies on the north, and injecting where we could small sections of landscape. As we move to the top level, again, we've got functional, but, you know, modest bedrooms and living and sleeping spaces. So keeping this nice and tight and really allowing that first floor to be as generous as possible. And that's just a quick cut through the section. So northern aspect on the left here. So getting plenty of articulation, making sure that through all of our decisions, we're getting as much light and as much ventilation through these townhouses as possible. This is that shared driveway and pedestrian entry here. And this is the front elevation. And really trying to take some of those local or vernacular materials from the precinct. So we've got this brick base, which really speaks of the earth, creating this nice, deep and cool undercroft. And then we start to lend weatherboards, the timber and tin as we move through the top levels. That's just the northern elevation there, and we get to see these breaks, which hopefully inject a little bit of vegetation and light into each of the townhouses. So this is the result from the street. As we said, we've got this really beautiful, really folds up out of the earth. This large kind of undercroft space here with this planted out arbour on the southern side. A large kind of gesture to the street from that front unit, which is really about creating that conversation back with the street. And then really trying to lend some of the materiality of the local timber and tin in the area. We can see the line marking, which helps just to nominate each of the unit entries as we come through. That's a little bit more square on, and I think we've got a photo here. That's from the northwest. That's from within that driveway undercroft. And we can see here a bit more recently, this is starting to take over, the vegetation is starting to take over. This space here, although it probably doesn't seem like too much, ended up being one of the really kind of great spaces or great surprises of the project. Of the 4 units, I think there's 2 families with kids. There's a widower in one of them, and I think there might be 3 dogs shared between each of the units, all of the units. And of a Saturday or Sunday, there'll be bicycles and kids riding up and down here. They'll be playing with their neighbours' dogs. People will be washing cars, and I believe at Christmas time, they kind of set up a beautiful big kind of banquet and shared meal down here, which really kind of harks back to that traditional undercroft flexible space, and we really loved it. As we move into each of the units, this is coming up the stairs looking north, and you can start to get a sense of us trying to inject as much vegetation along that northern facade, as much light, and just small moves like getting these open staircases in. Once again, small architectural moves that just help to make the project really kind of sing together. And you can see that natural light kind of washing down in behind there, and I think you can just see the underside of the door. That's that kind of small little powder room that we tucked in, and we concealed that in. And then just a closer shot of that vegetation elevation. This is looking from that living room back out across the balconies. And that's where we talk about sharing landscapes. So really being able to extend the view, extend the space while maintaining some privacy, both to and from the development. This is the east unit. And as part of the developer's brief, we had a few variations within the unit. So this is one of the darker colour schemes, but shared amongst both the darker and the lighter colour schemes is just plenty of natural materials and really trying to inject some higher end finishes where we will get the most kind of back, I would say, in these kitchens, getting that timber veneer and in the floors, and then where we can keep things more modest, such as the bedrooms, we're just trying to manage the materials that way. That's that lighter scheme, and this is the western unit with that large kind of aperture back to the street. That's a view down there from the small little butler's pantry, but nice big windows at the kitchen and getting that cross ventilation all the way through from north to south. That's just occupying that front northwestern balcony. Once again, just small little things where we can inject a little bit of natural material. The client was more than happy to come along with that. Just showing once again that injection of greenery. Then this is up in the upper level. This is the master bedroom to the north, or the western unit, the one that faces the street. Trying to express that gable just as much as we can. Get a little bit of extra height, but really kind of feeling the form of the building. And then just some nice little simple details with the timber handles, and a little window seat. And then this is some of the wet areas. Again, trying to keep them as modest as possible where we can. Things like white wall tiles and a nice grey floor tile. Being able to just inject a few little natural materials with the timber. And then back out to the front. And I think that's about it.
Vinton, thank you so much. Yeah, just beautiful. And as you said, consistent throughout these is the detailing, both externally and internally. Really lovely. So staying in Bulimba area, and we're now going to Brian Wong from BVN, and Brian's going to take us through the Boatyard project.
Thanks, Alison. And hello to all. I'm just sharing my screen here. And so hopefully you can all see that now. Yes? Okay. So this is the Boatyard. Okay. Here we have just an aerial view, and this is the Bulimba Peninsula in this corner here, Newstead over this side, and the portside development over here, and our site is in this little red circle. And along this reach of the river was once this boat building industry. And so just to quickly go over some of the overall ideas that informed our project. So the first one is about place, and it's an acknowledgement of the history of the area. It acknowledges the sort of historical kind of setting that our site is within. And as it was, the site itself was the former boat building site for Norman R. Wright. And also, as it were, our client was the grandson of the owner, and so this was a very dear project to him. The second set of ideas is about ideas about climate and probably really the idea about the joy of being out on the water and being on boats, and in that the way boats have a way to sort of handle and manage the climate in providing comfort and privacy. And lastly, ideas about quality, and so embedded throughout the project are ideas about well-refined, well-considered interiors and craftsmanship and building, in particular with the interiors such as the boats, and also the association with the maritime activity and of an ocean liner. Here we have our site plan or context plan. So at the top of the page is the Brisbane River. And then along this green strip here, as part of the development code for Brisbane City Council, as part of the requirement to redevelop these sites, a requirement is made to introduce a new 10-metre zone of green space, which is new public amenity along the riverfront here. And each of these sites provide an access down through to this park, and also maintains a view corridor through the site to the river. And then on the other side of the site is the residential area, and typically these houses are the traditional Queenslander or elevated timber type homes. This is our climate diagram, and so the general strategy with the site is where we can see these red bars. We're trying to keep the walls here solid, enclosed and private, and then where these walls face north and south, we try to keep them more open and transparent so we can take advantage of light and sun and breezes and things like that. So getting a bit closer down in the ground plane, we come into our site. We have our 4 volumes, and you might have noticed that in terms of scale, the 4 volumes are very similar to the developments either side of it, and that's all informed by the development code, and so in a way that's quite prescriptive, and therefore our project was about creating a garden that these 4 buildings would then be nestled into. And so we start here along Byron Street, we come through, we enter into this subtropical garden, we come in, and in front of us is the pool with a deck, and then it leads back down to a river address down to the park. To get into the buildings, we come laterally and we move into individual lobbies for each of the buildings before going up. And then for all of the ground apartments, they all have their own private courtyards. So each of these apartments get their own, on the riverside, they get their own private courtyard and gates accessing to the riverside. Down on the street side, these apartments all have their own private courtyards, as well as street side courtyards. Stepping up a level, this is the typical plan. And so what you'll see is that each floor plate comprises of 2 apartments in each of the towers. And so importantly, what underpins the planning or the organisation of these apartments is that the main living spaces, which are these spaces here and also these spaces here, all of the main living spaces have view and access to the river, whilst at the same time not looking into each other. And so there's a sense of privacy between all of the main living areas. This is our section. River on this side, obviously, the park, courtyard. And so buildings on the riverside are 4 stories, and the development code in a way recognises the high value of those sites on the riverside. And so these buildings here are allowed to be 4 stories, whilst also recognising that on the other side are the residents with a 2-story component. And so the towers on the street side are 3 stories only to help mediate the scale difference between the 2 sides of the street. We have gardens in between, and also on the street side, these apartments will have their own courtyard, as I spoke earlier, but what it also does is contribute to the character of the street in that there's like a veranda and a garden that fronts the street, and so it plays a part in the whole character of Byron Street. This is our elevation, and what we can see is a composition of smooth and textural elements along with a play of flush and recessed elements in the fenestrations. So then this was the result of that elevation, and you can see the composition of our horizontally proportioned and refined spandrels and walls. We've got very strong bands that contain all our claddings and windows and screens. Coming around to the riverside, we then see that the northern elevations are very open, very transparent. And this is a view standing on that promenade along the river, looking down the river. The courtyards as a buffer to these apartments. So now I'll take you in through the development now, and you'll notice a little key plan here, just so you can orientate yourself with where these photos are viewing at. And so we come through the site, through the garden. There's a lush tropical garden, and so the experience of this garden is very much enriched by various materiality, lighting quality, and materiality as well. Moving through down to the back, we come to a river setting at that back pool deck. And then turning a 180 back, and then we can see the pool. It's framed with these refined gable walls looking back into the residential suburb. And this house here gets a really good view through to the river. And then we make our way back down to the central garden and make our way to the building entries. And so walking through these gardens, there's a number of experiences that you'll get. So there's the gardens, there's these little pergolas, these screened balconies, and cantilevered roof forms with refined spandrel corners. And then we find ourselves at the entry, which are, each entry is marked with this feature tile pattern. Then we go through, and so just explain quickly about the 2 different types of apartments. So we have the riverside apartments here. Main living spaces, master bedroom and ensuite, secondary bedrooms, and a secondary living space or family room. And so importantly, these apartments are all through apartments, so they have a connection or an aspect to both the river and to the street. And they're all designed for cross ventilation, so you can get breezes right through the whole apartment. The other thing is that there are generous openings around the perimeter of the apartment. And so you get a sense that you're in a home, more of being in a home and less about in an apartment. And so in this view, you can kind of see that you don't really get much of a view of your neighbors, but it's really just you and the river, and there's a sense of feeling like you're in a home. These are the street side apartments. They're 2 bedroom, 2 bathroom its main living areas, and they have balconies to both the riverside and the street side. And the living area has an opening that opens right up for the full width of that living room. So in the photo, you'll see that there's a view straight to the river and really opening that window up so you can really embrace this idea of subtropical living. And now I'll just go through the riverside apartments and have a look at some of the interior details. So when you come through the apartment, the first thing you'll arrive at is the kitchen. And so you can see that in accordance with what's been set up externally on those refined gable walls, we have a zone here which captures our feature timber. And so within that, it houses all the activity of the kitchen, the fridges, windows, and above and below this zone, we have integrated storage and cupboards. Above it, you can see we have a shaped bulkhead, which delineates the higher 3 meter space above the living area. And so then extending this elevation out, this is the elevation. We can see that these datum lines extend all the way out to the balcony. And so just reminding us externally, behind the kitchen here, we have the timber cladding, and out externally of the window, we have these screens. We have an opening, an operable panel in the window to get ventilation through, and another window to get views out through. And then continuing outside, we have a barbecue with screens. And so then looking out, just looking along this wall here, we get more of a view here, and I'll just talk about this wall. One of the interesting and key ideas in the project are about these walls, which are these external walls coming down the end here. And so they're quite deep walls. They're quite refined gables with deep cavities that house a number of things. So it provides deep recesses for these windows. It provides solar control over these windows. They frame the views. They house these screens, and it provides a place to house these inbuilt storage and barbecue. So then moving outside into the balcony, we can get a view down the river. It's a tower behind, and these screens are sliding and operable, so they can be adjusted. And this detail on the left here starts to indicate what our intentions are for some of the detailing. And so there's a very strong effort in trying to achieve seamless transitions from inside to outside, so we can enjoy both of those qualities of internal and external at the same time. And so the internal floor finishes are aligned flush with the external floor finishes, which carry through past the balustrade. Likewise with the ceiling, aligned flush as it goes and transitions into soffit outside. And then turning back into the apartment, this is a view back into that kitchen. And we'll get a little view of that family room in the background. Making our way through to the master bedroom, we walk through a set of timber wardrobes and looking out. And again, the bedroom has an access to the balcony, generous window openings out onto the river. Stepping through and looking back, again, there's this curved bulkhead again to define the sleeping area with a 3 meter high ceiling. And the ensuite we can see here has a window that opens out to the bedroom. Then inside the bedroom, like the kitchen, it's connected to the bedroom and also the river through that. And so probably just to summarize, like what we've tried to do is show you what this project is like through the photos, but what the photos probably don't convey is the sense that of what it feels like to be in these apartments. And so with the design of these refined gabled walls and providing solar and thermal control and also privacy, then the feeling of these apartments are really kind of like you're just in your own home, and it's just you and the river, and you're not in an apartment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian. Yeah, I love the fact that, you know, referencing the provenance of the site, and again, you know, that attention to detail is amazing. So our last but not least project this afternoon, again, still in the Bulimba area, and I'm introducing Jürgen Weigel from Arkfield to talk about Barker Bulimba. Barker Bulimba, got that right?
Yes, that's right. So we stay in the neighborhood, and Barker is also in Byron Street, and yeah, so some of the things I will say will probably sound similar to what Brian said. So Brian has already done half of my job, I think, but I also would like to say thank you to the Institute for shortlisting this project and for giving us the opportunity to speak here at the webinar. So yeah, you just have seen this image before, but now we are here. So Brian's side is just a little bit up the street. And so, I mean, with this side, it's all about the river. It has really good views to the river. It's right on the river and has a northeast orientation, what became actually quite rare in Brisbane. There are not many sites left. It's also in close proximity to Bulimba itself and Apollo Road City Cat Terminal. And also to point out is that that the Bulimba barracks will be developed shortly, and suddenly Byron Street actually sort of ends up in the center between things. As Brian has pointed out, it was an industrial strip along the river there with boat maintenance and boat building history. These were actually quite big sheds, and between the sheds there were a few corridors. So it was a town planning requirement actually to maintain these few corridors, and also we had to give away 10 meters at the river for a future river walk. So it actually reduced our site and minimized the site, but then actually it turned out to be quite tight. Another issue is 4-story apartment buildings next to an established housing precinct. So we wanted to address that. 4-story apartments next to these houses wouldn't be the right answer in our opinion. And then for sure, somehow we had to respond to the history of the industrial site there. Just by putting on the side these few corridors and then an access spine through the center means we end up with 4 building volumes. However, these building volumes, they have good proportions, and then also give us sufficient building separation between the buildings, but also to the boundary so that we can have good windows all the way around. So in section, it looks like that. We decided to have townhouses facing Byron Street. These townhouses mediate between the existing houses on the other side of Byron Street and the 4-story apartment building. And also the typology of townhouses we thought matches well with, or better with the houses on the other side of the street instead of having an apartment front there. So we liked the idea of using nautical lines from boats, nautical design. You know, we like these details you find on boats, like these angled windows, you know, this molded, round shaped like things on boats. And it all seems to be integrated and molded and made out of one thing. And then our client was also keen to call the development barca, what is Italian and simply means boat. So we ended up with 2 apartment buildings. Building 1 is a smaller building. Building 3 is 2 is slightly larger and has 3 apartments in there. Originally was designed for 4, but because of the market feedback and the demand for larger apartments, we changed that to 3 apartments. Overall, we achieved 21 apartments. All apartments are single loaded, means they're small cores at the back. And these cores usually serve 1 or 2 apartments, and directly in the lifts directly open out. And all living areas and balconies face the river. All bedrooms are basically at the back. And that's the riverfront. So we highlighted the slab edges, and the sophites are painted dark. So it was important to us, firstly, to blend the balconies into the building. They shouldn't look like an add-on. We wanted them to be a full integrated part of it. And then secondly, the dark colors on the sophites take the glare away. You get reflections from or off the water, sun reflecting off the water, and then creates glare. So we wanted to take that away. And the other important thing to point out is a sort of facade design feature we put on the outside of the buildings and on balconies as well. So these buildings are really at the river. They're seen very well from the river and across the river. And yeah, they're true to its location. The balconies are designed to maximize the views to the river. And then basically green spines between the buildings were really important in the communal areas as well. So that's how our pool looks like. It's similar to the BVN version. We just have a kink in it. That's the main difference. And then our design feature here is this molded thing, which actually is attached to the corner of the balcony. It starts as an awning, becomes a sort of facade element, and then balustrade, continues on the soffit with an integrated light, and on the upper level continues with an integrated barbecue. That's the integrated barbecue, a molded Korean shape. The rest on the outside is havel. It has been made out of havel, 2-pack finish on it. So it, yeah, so I was inspired by a yacht. We thought maybe something like that you could find on a yacht. Some more details, and there again, this windows, you know, and shapes as you find on yachts, and also this twisted internal batten ceiling that's also inspired by boats. But by the end of the day, it's all about living by the river, and we try to maximize this experience. There's no threshold on the balconies. You step out even, and we wanted to have a seamless transition between inside and outside, have frameless balustrades, and yeah, we really wanted to maximize the views to the river. And also the dark, if I go back, sorry, the dark finishes on the balcony also really nicely frame the view out to the river. So that actually worked quite well. So the view out becomes the true hero. And then on the other 2 buildings or building blocks were townhouses with the main front facing Byron Street. 7 townhouses, basically 2 townhouse types. The end ones are slightly smaller. They about 230 square meters, and then the ones in the center, they are just over 300 square meters, and then the external areas are between 30 to 40 square meters. all 3 stories, and have the terrace out to the green spine at the back. That's the street front. So the breakup of these buildings, we thought, should match the Queenslanders on the other side, but at the same time, they wanted to be true to the development, to the Barker development. So we used similar slick nautical lines, these angles, also the finishes with white and some subtle timber in it. And then these townhouses also have a dark base. That's blue stone. That's probably a bit less boaty. It's a quite solid base, quite dark, to actually take the feeling of 3 stories away. So we wanted to highlight or more articulate these buildings as 2-story buildings, also to blend in more with the housing precinct on the other side. And then also the corners have features, and yeah, the windows, yeah, they're similar to the windows on the apartments. Some more details. And actually, while the apartments is all about the river, and I mean, even 4 of these townhouses have out of the back limited views to the river, but the main thing actually was to have these townhouses as a more urban thing, and they also have city views from all these balconies here, and some of the windows. You get actually good city views. The green spine between the buildings also really important on our project. We try to maximize screens and privacy, and also have at the same time lush green landscaping. And then the forecourts to the internal private lobbies. On the inside, for the interior, we also used the nautical theme. The lines are found, but otherwise it's quite it's high quality finishes. We used marble, solid timber veneer, and 2-pack. And yes, and then there is this corner window, which is clearly a feature. Wasn't necessarily easy to get it right. Structurally, it was a challenge, and the builder told us that it was also really difficult to install them because the ends of the windows were quite thin and tended to break. And we also have extra height in these apartments. We have 3.3 meter floor-to-floor height. We try to aim for almost 3 meters in the living area. And then there's our twisted ceiling. I spent a lot of time on site with the builder and sorting out the details. They took on the challenge and they delivered a beautiful ceiling. Walk-in robe, bedroom, and bathrooms. Also in the bathrooms, we brought in the nautical theme. Interiors of the townhouses, generally, if we design a townhouse and on our own, we probably would put an external atrium in there. I mean, that's inefficient and no client will ever agree to that. So, but we try to bring at least an internalized atrium in there with some external finishes. So we use the blue stone at the bottom and have a planter in there. And even the walls up, we use the external finish, axon finish, and some of the external lighting just to give it a little bit of an external feel. And then when the veranda doors are open and you get sort of the nice transition between inside and outside, we think that actually works quite well. Just some overall sections right at the end and elevations. And again, a floor plan showing the whole lot. That's the Barker project. Thank you for listening. Back to you, Alexandra.
Jürgen, thank you so much. And yeah, wonderful way to finish up looking at that exquisite detailing again. So yeah, I've thoroughly enjoyed this afternoon. I've learned so much. It's brilliant to be able to get in and really understand all these projects in more detail. So I want to say thanks to Shane P and Shane T, to Erhard, to Linton, to Brian, and to you, Jürgen. And don't forget that we have another session on Monday afternoon. We're sort of coming to the end now. So the session on Monday is the regional building of the year award. So this one will be a sort of recorded session, but we've also got 3 of our regional juries who are going to be in conversation with Michael Linke, General Manager, Member Services. So I think it'll be a slightly different take on the awards process. And then of course the big night of nights is the 9th of July, where we have the State Awards digital announcement. If anyone's interested, you can tune in tonight to the Northern Territory Awards, see what's happening up there, but definitely tune in to our State Awards announcement. So thank you again, everybody. Magnificent projects, big and small. And we really appreciate you giving up your time, and to all the viewers as well for tuning in. Thank you, everyone.